Yeah.
Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. This is our second speaker series of the year, and for those of you who don't know, I'm Mary Ethelman. I'm one of the campus ministers at the Rice Catholic Student Center, and you also might not know that I have a master's in social work from the University of Houston, so I'm also a social worker. So I was really excited when our three panelists agreed to come and talk to us tonight about the intersection of faith and mental health. And so what we did was we sent them some questions ahead of time for them to think about, and they're going to answer some of those questions, and then at the end we will give the audience an opportunity to ask their own questions. So what we're going to start is by having each person introduce themselves. They all work at Rice. Tell us what their current role is at Rice, what their educational background is, and what type of mental health licensing that they currently hold. And also, all three of them are practicing Catholics, so they're going to share what parish that they attend, what church they attend. So, whoever would like to go first.
Everybody okay? Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Gabe Ramirez. I'm an LCSW, which I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a moment. Started to mention like the intersection between faith and mental health. Mine started pretty early because I was raised Catholic. My parents were both Catholic, and they were both counselors. So mine started pretty early. And also, my godfather who baptized me was a priest who actually had a master's in counseling. So I feel like my relationship with mental health and faith started pretty early, maybe as early as you can go. A little bit down the line, I'm from a small town south of Houston. I went and did my undergrad at the University of St. Thomas. Once I graduated, I went and worked at an inpatient facility here in Houston called the Vinegar Clinic. And during that time, I really just solidified that I wanted to do clinical practice and work with people. And so from there, I went to U of H, the GCSW, and also got my master's in social work. And after a few years, I took my clinical licensure exam, so now I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked in mental health now almost 20 years, and I'm coming up on 7 years here at Rice in the Counseling Center. And I'm about to come up on 1 month as the new director of the Rice Counseling Center. So happy to be with y'all. Oh yes, so currently I'm a part of the congregation at Most Holy Trinity in Angleton, Texas. Some of my favorite parishes in Houston though have been St. Cyril of Alexandria, which is over there off Westheimer in the Beltway, and a little bit further in the Energy Quarter is St. John Beyond.
Thank you, Gabe. Hello everyone, my name is Agnes Ho. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker and currently serving as the director of the Student Wellbeing Office. This is my going to be 14th years working at Rice, and I will talk a little bit more about like what we do in the Student Wellbeing Office in a minute. But so growing up, I was raised and born in Hong Kong, so I'm also like a born Catholic. So which means like my parents, who are also Catholic, got me baptized when I was just a few months old, back in Hong Kong. I don't know if anyone been to Hong Kong. It's a very mixed culture, which means there's like very traditional Chinese culture, but also there's a lot of like Christian and especially Roman Catholic. So growing up, I basically grew up in the church. And I also went to school, like Catholic school, all-girl Catholic school, from kindergarten to like high school. So as you could tell, I'm like a really practicing Catholic, which is like, you know, shaped a lot of my values, beliefs, and spiritual practice. In particularly, I grew up in the Salesian ministry, which is a lot of like emphasizing about working with young people, working with youth. And that's also, I was nurtured as a leader in church. And also, I still remember when I was 16, and I went to room because it was like 2000, the Jubilee years. Well, by now you probably know how old I am. We can do the math. So I still remember, even I was 16, that's probably like the first time being out of home, joining, right, the Salesian youth movement, be able to be, right, like being with a group of youth and meeting with other youth from all around the world and ultimately meeting Pope. And it's like, very spiritual at that point. So I think like that memory really, really stuck in me, and that's how I really committed to work with like young people. And that's also the reason why I chose like social work, because growing up, especially growing up in a church, I was actually surrounded by a lot of social workers. Actually, social work is a very, very popular profession in Hong Kong. It's very well developed, well paid, I would say more than even youth. So I don't know why I end up being here. Just kidding. But like that's very natural for me to be a social worker, and that's the reason why I chose social work as a major when I went to college in Hong Kong. So I got my Bachelor of Social Work in City University of Hong Kong, and in my very last semester, I got an opportunity to come to the US as an exchange student. Actually here in the Houston area at the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, just to get an experience. Very fortunately, I was able to get the scholarship and be able to stay and get an advanced standing and also get the master degree in social work. And that's the reason why I end up staying in Houston after graduation. I work in a government setting and also a nonprofit setting before coming over here and working at Rise. So right now I am still practicing my, like spiritual practice, and my parish is over at the St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church, which is not that far away from here because I live in the neighborhood. I have two kids, 8 years old and 11 years old. They also go to school at St. Vincent de Paul Catholic School. It's really great that having a parish really close by your neighborhood. It's a walkable distance, so I have no excuse that I have to go to. That's great. So thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thanks, Agnes. Hi everyone. Hello. My name is Elisa Brewer. I am a licensed professional counseling associate. I graduated from Rice in 2020, so I've been at Rice, part of Rice for a long time. I've been working here for 3 years. I did the math. I always say 2. It's been 3 and a little more than that. I'm the Associate Director of Programs and Education for the Student Wellbeing Office, and I'll explain what that means in just a little bit. At Rice, I graduated with a bachelor's in neuroscience and cognitive science, specializing in psychology. I really thought I was going to be a doctor. Like, I was pre-med all the way through Rice. I thought I was going to be a doctor. But God had different plans, so I took a couple years to find what I wanted to do and what I thought He was calling me to. I was blessed to have a 2-year internship with the Student Wellbeing Office while I was here, mostly creating flyers and making the Instagram kind of cute. So I called a couple of my mentors, and I found Dr. Colette Nicolau. I talked to her also. It's like, hey girl, what should I do with my life? And I went to school at St. Thomas, at the University of St. Thomas up the street. During that program, I did a year of internship with Rejoice Counseling Apostolate, which is a Catholic counseling group here in Houston. I did my work way out at Christ the Redeemer in Cyprus, which 2 to 3 times a week, also working full-time and being in school 2 full days a week. That was really exhausting. But it was a great year, and I was very blessed to be able to work with some folks in in that Cyprus community, and also still be working here at Rice and get some student experience. So as a licensed professional counseling associate, that means that I am fully licensed, but I'm still under supervision of my supervisor up until I finish the number of clinical hours that I need to take my full LPC. I usually attend St. Anne Catholic Church up the street just a little bit. However, my husband is in medical school, so where we go also varies quite a bit based on his schedule of maybe when the Cowboys play. So I do come to Mass pretty frequently, also here at St. Mary's, so if y'all see me around, feel free to say hello. We go to Holy Rosary in Midtown with some regularity, and University of St. Thomas still has the latest Mass in Houston at 7:30 p.m., so we go at least once a month. Yeah, thank y'all for having me.
So for our next question, they represent two different offices, two different departments at Rice. So I don't know if y'all know what the differences are and what services they provide, but we wanted them to basically give a very brief synopsis of what they do, what those offices do. So Gabe, we'll let you go first because you're the only one from the Rice Counseling Center.
Not the only Catholic, but the only one. The Rice Counseling Center, we're in the Gibbs Wellness Building. We actually are in the same hallway, so that's oftentimes why people think we are at the same office or do the same things. So with the Rice Counseling Center, we're really trying to meet students where they're at with their mental health needs. So one of the first things that we offer is an initial assessment, so someone can come in and maybe oftentimes people come in and they've been kind of questioning for a while, like what would it be like to talk to somebody? Or what if my stress or my anxiety just persists to a point where it's getting harder to manage or it's impacting more of my day-to-day life and quality of life. So they can come in, they can do an initial assessment, it's all covered in your student health fees. We are a confidential office, so unless somebody signs a release of information, everything we talk about is a private conversation. And what I really appreciate about the counseling center, along with my social work values, is about just trying to see someone as a whole. You know, how are things going in your social life? How are things going in your personal life? How are things going academically? How's your eating and your sleep? We really try to get a composite of how someone's doing and how they're impacting the world around them and how the world's impacting them as well. And once we do an assessment, we will tell people about our services. One of our most popular services is bi-weekly counseling, so someone can come and work with a counselor every 2 weeks just to kind of set some goals and have someone to touch base with. We also can help people find some services off campus, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later today too, about if someone wanted a little more specialized treatment, if they wanted to have a little bit more control about the frequency or who they meet with, we can help people look through their insurance and find some providers off campus. We also can help them look at their insurance if they're interested in things like ADHD testing or more cognitive neurological testing as well. We also offer brief consultation sessions, so if someone maybe was dealing with something a little bit more timely, they weren't quite thinking they needed to work with a counselor, but they still kind of wanted to get some additional support, we can do that as well. I would say, I feel like it doesn't happen as much the last few years. I'm kind of curious to know why, but for so many years, I would do an assessment with somebody and they would say, do you think I need to be here? And I would always kind of give them the same answer. I was like, I think everyone deserves cases where they can talk about how they're feeling and try to understand themselves a little bit better. So it's not so much about, oftentimes people say, well, I'll go and talk to counseling, they're going to make me take a leave of absence, or they're going to make me drop classes. And it's like, it's really more about having a space where we can try to understand ourselves and expand our support system rather than trying to change everything that's going on in our life. So I think that will let me know if I left out any of our services because y'all know about it so well too. So.
There's also a social worker in the counseling center to help students find off-campus treatment providers. Because we're in a greater Houston area, there's a lot of providers taking the insurance or providing sliding scale services. So I think that's really important because the Rice Counseling Center is wonderful, right, providing clinical work. At the same time, sometimes students may need more long-term or intensive care, and there's a lot more options.
You also just reminded me, I wanted to we do have virtual and in-person sessions, so sometimes that might fit with people's schedules. We also do have some non-traditional hours, so we do have some counselors that can meet with people in the evenings virtually. We also have some availability on the weekends, so we've just seen a little bit more response for that. The other thing too that I would say, I'm sorry, it was just on my mind, it's escaping. But also,
another very common questions that students ask is like, do I need to pay if I access the services over the counseling center or the student wellbeing office? The answer is, well, you already paid because in your administration fees, there's an item called student health and wellness fees. So the fees is actually included when you access the counseling center, Rice Counseling Center, Student Wellbeing Office, Student Health Services, the SAFE Office. So if you don't need it, of course you don't need it. But then when you need it, you never know. And we want you to don't worry to pay for anything. So which means when you come to our offices, you don't need to pay for anything. I know the Rice Counseling Center might need to ask for your insurance information, but it's more because just in case, right? If student might need off-campus referrals. Well, thank you, Gabe. I know like a lot of students may be confused about our offices. I think like one of the a little bit easier to explain is when students experience normal stress, then they can start with the student wellbeing office. When normal stress become a distress, which means like starting to impact their daily life functioning, it would be great then, to start with the Rice Counseling Center and get some more clinical work, including like what Gabe mentioned, right? Like evaluation, assessment, and even ongoing counseling. And there's also psychiatrists can help students to manage psychiatric medications. Of course, students may not sometimes know where to get started. And the message from us to you all is like, don't worry. Because we want to make sure both of our offices are very accessible and approachable. That's the reason why we share the same phone number and same location. Especially for students who doesn't really know what their needs are, you can just come and we can help to figure it out for you all. Especially in the Student Wellbeing Office, we provide student what we call student well-being advising, which means we wanted to create a space, a safe space for students to talk about the presenting concerns. Sometimes these presenting concerns could be like stress related, it could be academic stress, right? It could be stress about family concern, stress about adjustment concern, or anything like, in daily life or personal life might be going through. But oftentimes when we talk about the presenting issue, there could be some underlying issue, the root cause of the concern. That's how the wellbeing advising can also do some analysis, right? Dig in a little bit more and figure out, is it like, resources that you need, or sometimes it could be maybe some values and beliefs, right, that you may be struggling with. Sometimes it could be, like some pre-existing or underlying health concern or mental health concern. So that's the reason why in our office, we can talk through some of these concerns and brainstorm some solutions together first. Of course, if students' concern may be related to more like mental health or maybe experience some symptoms of mental health conditions, we can also help students connect with the Rice Counseling Center as well as navigate any other resources available. Sometimes it could be academic options, sometimes it could be looking at the academic calendar together, right? Looking at some policy in place just to see what other options might be available. With that being said, sometimes we also help students to navigate taking some medical leave or medical withdrawal if there's a need to focus more on their mental health. And for students who would like to come back after medical leave, we also help them walk them through the process because we want them to be back. So we will plan together with them the roadmap back to Rise. So those are just like a couple of things that we will do to help students to making sure that they are not alone, and there's like professionals here to help them plan and also come up solutions together. So that's what we do for what we call student well-being advising and also case management. And then we also have a really big part that we do, and I will let Elisa to talk more about that.
Thanks, Agnes. So my primary role is programming and outreach, which means that a lot of times I'm out teaching in the community, hosting events similar to this one. Some are purely educational, some are purely for fun, some are somewhere in between. So we cover topics like uncertainty, stress management, time management, interpersonal relationships, setting boundaries, recovering from a breakup, or how to break up with respect. Let's see what else did I write down. We do a lot of work in suicide prevention as well. It's a cause that's really, really important to our office, and it's also very, very important to me. So we do a lot of suicide prevention. I have taught off campus also about like healthy romantic relationships from the mental health and Catholic intersection lens. I do that for my mom's catechism class every year, and that's one of my favorites. And then some of our more fun programs, we've done meditation, we do gardening once a month, we go to the holistic garden over by the rec center and we just volunteer, which y'all are totally invited to. We have done pumpkin painting, we're gonna have another painting event on Monday, just for some Halloween fun. We do study breaks, and we do a lot of tabling, so if you're around for any of the tabling events where they have, all of the student resources, we're always there. We also oversee several student organizations. So we oversee the Rice Health Advisors, we oversee Rice Alliance for Mental Health Awareness, we oversee Owls in Recovery, Grad Wellbeing Peers, the Caregivers Program, let's see, Rice Coalition on Substance Use, and we train the Peer Wellbeing Athletic Advisors. So we have a lot of hands in many fires.
And just to add that to, I know like some of you may be interested to do research, right? Our office is also trying to be more like data-driven in the last couple of years, so that's the reason why we also conducted a health needs assessment or health campus-wide health survey, which is called National College Health Assessment. We just completed one last fall semester, 2024. So we're looking at the data, and we also like try to make a good use of the data just to see what are the needs among students. Just a couple of examples. For example, like we look at what are the top 10 mental health conditions that students self-reported. Because in our day-to-day work, we won't be able to release like who we're working with because in the counseling center there's confidentiality, right? And we want to protect student privacy too. But we can do like survey like that for students who feel comfortable to answer those surveys. We're able to gather those data and to look at what are the areas that we probably need to focus on probably in the next year or in the next 3 years, so it can be more informed about our service needs and better serve meeting the students' needs as well.
So our next question is, several of you all mentioned that sometimes students would like to seek counseling outside the Rice environment, and there's a wealth of different opportunities in the Houston area in terms of professional services. But if any of our students here, or if they have any friends, want to seek outside counseling, our question was whether or not you all had any specific recommendations for places they could go that were Catholic friendly or Catholic specific. And also kind of combined with that, how would you recommend that they screen a potential counselor to try to figure out whether or not that counselor would align with their Catholic values?
I can start with this one. If you don't have a pen and paper, I have a list. So you can start with the Archdiocese website. It doesn't matter what Archdiocese you're in, there's a list. It's always outdated, so you do have to check, but it's a good place to start. You can also check CatholicTherapist.com. That is a website that has a more up-to-date list, and that can be really helpful. There's a Catholic Psychotherapy Association as well, so if you just Google Catholic therapists, it'll give you some of those associated partnerships so that you can actually search directories. There's also Christian Counselors of Texas, or you can even search on a Psychology Today, and you can look for specific faith backgrounds. Here in Houston, the one that I worked for was Rejoice Counseling Apostolate, so they're an organization of exclusively Catholic counselors. They also have a Lataria Center out in Katy, so if you're in that area and need number summers or something, that might be helpful. My supervisor owns her own practice. It's called Begin Again. She's an excellent supervisor, so I imagine she's an excellent therapist. And the other one here in town is called Grazia Plena, and I've got some good friends I met in grad school who work over there as well. They're wonderful Catholic ladies. There are male counselors there too, but I only know a couple of the girls.
There's also Catholic Charities. right?
Yes,
Especially like, student might need sliding scale services, and they also have like case management and legal assistant, like program as well.
I think when it comes to trying to screen a therapist for who's going to match your values, some of them will put up on their websites, where they align, or if they're coming from a faith-based background or coming from a Christian background. But really, when you're trying to find a therapist who will work for you, sometimes you just have to get in the door and see if y'all vibe. I think, going off their website, they'll always put a mission, they'll put some kind of value statement. If that sounds good to you, sometimes you just have to meet them and see, how you feel about them. Because a Catholic counselor may not even be the right fit, right? Just because they're Catholic doesn't mean they're the right therapist for you. So when you are screening, also kind of keep that in mind, that sometimes you meet somebody, just like when you meet friends, you're like, this is really not it. Finding a therapist is kind of the same way. Sometimes you'll vibe, sometimes you won't, and that's okay.
And there's always like free consultation. Many clinicians offer like 10 to 15 minutes like consultation without charging you. So that will be another way, right, to get to know a therapist and ask them questions, and you can be like transparent. And also, this is what I would expect. This is my values. I just want to, see what's your values. Would that be, aligned, together? So you can be upfront, right, to talk about what you need.
No, I mean, that's a great list of resources, and I think, Agnes, you touched on it just in terms of thinking about what being able to ask that any good clinician should be able to say whether or not they're a good fit for you. So they're not about just trying to meet with you just for the sake of getting new clients. I think sometimes when it comes to disclosure, like Agnes said, sometimes people will advertise that they work from a faith standpoint. I know that sometimes, actually it's very rarely that I ever disclose to clients about my faith. Because sometimes they don't usually ask. And I also know that sometimes that might be a part of why they're trying to understand some things. And so the idea that if someone they thought who was Catholic or Christian, sometimes people have asked me, and I will usually ask them a question, and 99% of people have never asked me to disclose after I've asked them. Somebody says, are you Christian, or are you Catholic? And I say, well, usually people ask me that because they're either one, worried they're going to offend me in session, which has never happened, or two, they're worried that I'll judge them, which never happens in session. I was like, do you still wait to answer? They're like, no, that kind of covers what I was worried about. I said, good. But I also think about when I was at St. Thomas, one of my favorite professors during one of our courses said, if you leave here with my faith, I've done something wrong. That's not my role. My role is not to get you to sound like me, talk like me, look like me, but my goal is to just share my own experiences and whether that helps your goal. And that's the way that I operate as a clinician. I come in with the understanding that this is your space. This is your opportunity to look at the goals you want to look at and have a space that's non-judgmental while you explore, do I agree with my thoughts? Does my emotions make sense to me based off what I'm going through? As we mentioned before, any good clinician will have a quick chat with you, maybe an initial session, just to kind of see if it's a good fit, see if your needs match up with their strengths are. Because I wouldn't want somebody going to a counselor just because they're Catholic if their needs were something else. And I think also as well, one of the things that we need to think about is also just the role of stigma when it comes to mental health. I know oftentimes people may think well, if I just pray harder, pray to church more, that some of these things will be relieved, which can be true when we are part of a community and when we're reflecting more, but also having someone outside of ourselves be able to give some perspective about, here's what I'm thinking, here's the questions that I have, here's the things that just don't quite make sense in this season of my life, and where that goes based off past teachings or past experiences.
Well, Gabe actually just led in to one of my next questions, which was, you kind of addressed it a little bit already, but was what misconceptions have y'all seen exist around seeking professional help for mental health issues and well-being issues in the general public, but especially among Christian or Catholic students? And you started addressing some of those when you were saying sometimes you've seen people who said, if I just pray harder, or if I just go to church more, it'll all go away. So are there other misconceptions y'all have seen?
it's kind of funny because I'm a therapist and my mom still has kind of the same attitude that she did when I wasn't, but she'll say sometimes like, what do they have wrong with them? And I'm like, Mom, that's not how this works, right? But it's that kind of narrative I think that plays for a lot of people. You only go see a counselor, you only go see a therapist, you only go see a shrink if there's something wrong with you. And I think that's what's wrong a lot of times, is that we have that kind of idea. And part of why I got into mental health, because I realized people who need help, not that kind of judgment. They don't need we don't need those kinds of labels, and you don't have to have anything in the world wrong to need extra support, to need a little bit of help. And we have students who are, some of my favorite students are my regulars, where there's really not anything wrong. They like talking, they like the accountability, they like, just checking in. And then other students are, or people who need mental health support, it really is coming from that lens of needing support, not needing judgment. And Gabe has said several times, like, just giving that platform for someone to feel openly supported and not judged. I think that's one of the greatest misconceptions about mental health, is that it has to have a label to be valued in the space, or that you have to admit to yourself that you have a problem in order to deserve help, and I don't think either of those things are true.
As I mentioned before, like I've worked in the field now going on about like 20 years, and I was even raised in the field because my parents were both mental health providers. But I mean, there's still the stigma that can come from like cultural. Like I know as a person of color that it was much more accepted for someone to go and talk to a priest or go and talk to someone in their church, but to go to counseling, that may not have been what you did. Which is, I always kind of would notice there was like a back door to that, because a lot of times people in our congregation would call my mom knowing that she was a counselor, but they would clarify by saying, well, she's a church. So that would be their way of being able to utilize that resource while still thinking they were respecting their family. And, even now, I talk to so many Rice students, and they oftentimes will feel worried talking to their parents about what they're going through. Like they think about, my parents are spending so much money, or my parents are far away, they'll be worried about me. So oftentimes they may feel like talking about what they're going through is like a sign of disrespect. Or it's, even though it's a confidential environment, they may feel like it's airing out like the family business in public. And I often think that like sometimes people will think that like, right, like just, whatever my struggles are, I just haven't tried hard enough, or I just haven't tried long enough. And that would be saying like, if I go and meet with someone else, then like I'm giving up, or I'm losing accountability, which is, I've worked in this field for so long, and my students, I think, are some of the hardest folks I've ever met with. Like there's just such a high expectation for productivity and to stay busy so much that like sitting time to reflect and to patience and give themselves a space sometimes feels counterintuitive to what they worked so hard for.
So for me, growing up as a Chinese Catholic, I think the cultural component is like more like it's a misconception, right? I remember growing up, if there's like, things that you wanted to like, let's say throw tantrum, right? My mom would say, you need to see a Chinese doctor, right? To prescribe you herbal tea that will make the fire in you slow down, or like, go to church and pray, right? Kind of like, help you to calm down too. So there's a lot of different ways to help you to feel better, instead of like really addressing the roots of the issue, which could be like mental health. And also the other way is like, I think like as a Catholic, we also believe like, right, faith is important. Oftentimes, right, like God will heal, God will fix it, which is true. At the same time, people may misinterpret that. I remember when I was in first grade, as I mentioned, right, I grew up in a Catholic school, so my religious teachers, one of my religious teachers, her name is Sister Wong. So I was in first grade, so 6 years old. I still remember this story that Sister Wong told the whole class, and I'm going to share it tonight, because that's shaped my way to see how God, right, help us through different channels. So she said, well, this is a story. So she said, there's a fire, and everybody kind of like ran away, trying to escape. There was a man refused to leave, and he kept praying and praying and praying in his house. But everyone, his neighbors, right, his family trying to come over and then ask him, please go, because like the fire is here. You would die. And then the man said, no, I'm not going to leave because God will come and save me. I won't die. And then a few minutes later, the firefighters came, which means like you really need to go. But then the man kept saying the same thing. No, God will save me. I will be fine. Right? So eventually the man died because he refused to leave. So I don't know if this is a true story or not, but the way that, I get it as a 6 years old was like, well, God is really there. God, send you the message through a lot of people around you. Sometimes we just need to be open up, open our ears, open our eyes, right? Open our hearts to really listen, to accept the help that people around us offer us because God is there. God is doing His work, right? Through all these people. So that's why, that really helped me to understand sometimes these misconceptions are really how we interpret it, and also, with Holy Spirit, right? Really help us to give us the wisdom to interpret in a way that, really what's the best way, right, to say this? God really has His plan in place. At the same time, we also need, right, that Holy Spirit to help us to open our eyes and ears to really accept the help from there. So I think that's the way that I would see how to manage all these misconceptions.
Thank you so much. I think that was very helpful for everyone to hear. Our next question is more on a personal level. We were interested in hearing how does you practicing your own Catholic faith help you to have good mental health for yourselves? And are there any specific practices within our Catholic faith that you feel like are especially good for you in making sure that you're healthy?
I don't think I could go throughout a single day and not do some of the practices that are there. One thing that I was a part of for many years before I met with a spiritual director, and so I would have once a month I would go and talk to somebody about just what my experiences were and help me to understand a little bit about through certain lenses how I can see God's love, how I can understand God's wisdom. And I still remember that the first time I ever met with them, they asked me, they said, so how do you talk to God? And I said, when are we not communicating with God? And I just thought about everything that I do is in conversation with God, whether that's practicing gratitude, practicing questioning, practicing curiosity. It's just trying to understand how does something fit a higher meaning for me. In terms of my own, mental health, I think that it's about having community. So I have a support system around me that I touch base with, whether that's me lending my ear to them or them being able to show up for me and talk about things. One of the most beneficial experiences that I was a part of was several years ago. I went to St. John Vianney and I got connected to a young adult support group, and it was also a young adult Bible study. And on because of that, we would go out and have fun. I really built a community around that, including I got connected to a group of guys who practiced E5. So we would all get together once a month, have dinner. It really just talk about what we were experiencing in terms of masculinity and how we thought that was helping people around us and how we thought we could do better. So it was really about just promoting spaces where I could be authentic with someone, even be vulnerable, taking risks, opening up, asking questions, but also just having a model for me as well that we were imperfect in our faith, imperfect as men, imperfect as people, and finding understanding and support the way that I think that God would want me to feel. I think if the counseling center is kind of insulated, so we are confidential, so sometimes, this is actually the first time I've ever been inside the library, so I don't really leave the office as much. But one thing that if you ever have seen me around campus is I usually will go and walk around at least once a day. And that's really just a form of reflection of trying to appreciate if it's really nice weather, trying to appreciate a lot of things around rice that I really like. Also trying to reflect about, what I'm hearing in sessions, what my own thoughts and needs are about that, but also, like with, one of the things that I would do with my spiritual director is the examine from St. Ignatius, is really just try to examine things that were coming into my life and try to find meaning and practice curiosity. Another like DBT skills, they would say dialectical behavioral therapy is like, you can have like a toolbox of things that are tactile, things that have different smells, they kind of help ground. And one thing I do is I kind of sometimes will keep a rosary in my pocket. So it's just every once in a while I just kind of like, just touch it and feel it, just kind of helps me to ground and just remember, what I'm trying to focus on throughout the day. And sometimes I will pray the rosary on the way to work, either through YouTube or something that allows me to reflect and hear, which we'll talk a little bit about that with social media too.
So for me, working as a social worker, I think that reminds me that I am not perfect, even though I'm helping a lot of people, but there's also a moment that I feel like I don't know, right? What exactly can be done? Other than validating, offer hope and support, right, to the students. There's a lot of things that as a normal human being, we cannot just solve it, right? Especially working with people who are in a very desperate stage of life, including a lot of grief happen, right? A lot of things that we cannot just explain. So those moments I do feel weak. I mean, not to don't know what to do with the student. It's more about after the session, right? When you think about that, wow, I cannot imagine an 18, 19 years old, you all need to go through this life-threatening or very intense situation. In those moments, especially I don't have an answer, I would leave it up to God, in my prayer. I mean, I pray for students a lot, in my prayer. And that's the moment that I find peace, I find hope. So I think those are very important. Especially growing up as a Salesian youth, or not youth anymore, but but then, the message from Don Bosco is really helpful, right? Daily Eucharist, right? As much as you can. Devotion to Mother Mary, right? And also, how to be really living in a cheerful life. And also practice gratitude, right? Those are really the key elements that help me to, practice my spiritual and also my daily life as well. And also growing up, I was in choir, and I tend to remember a lot of scriptures and gospel through songs and hymns. So my favorite is the prayer of Saint Francis, right? Make me a channel of peace. When there's sadness, right? I will bring joy. I mean, those are really stick in my mind, and especially when I don't know what to do, right? And that's the values that I hold for a long time since I was a kid, and I'm still holding that. So again, that gives me hope to carry on everyday lives.
For me, I think that there have been really specific times in my life where faith was kind of all I had. I think the theme of my early 20s was uncertainty. I graduated during 2020. I was 22 years old. I had no idea what I was going to do. Didn't get into medical school. All the job opportunities dried up. And my faith was kind of taken away. I remember when we couldn't go to church. We couldn't get communion. We couldn't go to confession. And that came kind of at a time in my life where I was about 2 years into sort of reclaiming my faith. When I first got to Rice, I won't say I wasn't a good Catholic. I wasn't as practicing as I should have been. But it's funny because when I started dating my husband, I've never missed a Mass since then, except for this one time that I thought UST had Mass and they didn't. Totally accidental, which I think God forgives me for. But it was during COVID that I realized how deeply I relied on my faith, how important it was for me I couldn't go to Mass, I had to watch it. I couldn't, feel that kind of community connection. I'd call one of our priest friends. I'd call my mom and ask her to tell me a saint story, or sit there and pray a rosary with my now husband. I think that relying on my prayer life and actually taking that intentional quiet time to be with God in those times where I'm not well, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, have proven to be some of the most formative times for me. I've been able to, in my prayer and in practicing, especially the rosary, is what I really clung to when I was in really the throes of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and it's still what I rely on now when I'm trying to practice my mental health as well. But during that COVID time, it really showed me just how much I need, Christ, how much I need Mary, how much I need the saints, how much I need the rosary. I like to say the rosary in like 4 different languages during COVID. That's kind of how I kept my sanity in 2 languages I don't speak. And then I think, I remember what it was right at the end of when I was deciding what to do with the rest of my life. I finally found somewhere, it was at University of Houston. They were offering the first exposition of the Blessed Sacrament that I had seen in about 1.5 years. I couldn't find him anywhere. I found him about 3 weeks before I left Houston to go home and spend time with my family before deciding the rest of my life. And so I had never really felt before, in front of that exposition of the Blessed Sacrament until that day. And since then, that has also been kind of a cornerstone of my relationship with God. Is I go to adoration and I spend time with Him. I try to spend time with Him when I'm feeling great. Sometimes I don't do that as well, but I know if I'm feeling terrible, that will make me feel better. So part of how I practice maintaining my mental health is also monitoring how well I'm interacting with my faith. Because I know when my faith fails, when my mental health fails, sometimes I lack, commitment or practice of the faith as well. So if I'm very on top of my faith, I'm monitoring my health also being, positive as well. I know I really rambled there, so I think
Thank you. So this is our last question from me before we open it up to questions from them. So our last question was from your perspective as mental health professionals. Are there any Catholic podcasters or Catholic social media influencers that you would recommend that you feel promote good mental health? Because obviously there are lots of people out there. But are there any that y'all like who align with what you feel is good mental health?
Yeah, I was kind of doing a deeper dive. I think there's a lot of apps and a lot of social media that I utilize to try to help you with my faith, which helps my mental health. But I still think there's a need for a lot more of the interest, so having direct questions and direct conversations around mental health. I can't speak to too much in terms of mental health, but I would say that for me personally, what's been part of my practices has been the Hollow app, which allows for meditation, prayer, reflection, also I always self-conscious how I'm pronouncing this, but Laudate, Laudate. And one thing that I really appreciate about that app is that it provides interactive rosaries, it has a deep inventory of prayer, but it also offers the daily readings and reflections. So it really helps me just to look inward about, how am I interpreting Scripture, how are other people interpreting Scripture, and trying to find how that fits into, either my values or my goals or what I'm trying to, practice that day, that week, or that season. I would also say that one thing that also invigorates my mental health is I can put on a talk of Father Richard Rohr on YouTube, and that can help me to just really notice, as he would say, if I'm trying to put God in a box, it can help me to remind myself that God probably is able to practice more self-compassion for me than I am, so that helps me to touch base with that as well.
I don't have particular podcasts or any recommendation using the social media, because if I don't know, I don't tend to recommend, because I need to listen first, right, before I can talk about it or recommend it. But I do, well, because I also like going to school now, getting a PhD, so most of my like podcast listening is like around like research and social work practice research stuff. So, but in terms of mental health and also, like also practicing our spiritual growth, I just like value human connection. I mean, not that like podcasts, right, social media is not good, but sometimes we miss that social connection. God is working through human beings too, right? So I really value like going to church, right? Even like in mass, right? Listen to the gospel or like praying, right? That seems to me like the most effective and also the most powerful way for me right now.
Yeah, of all the podcasts I listen to, I actually don't listen to any Catholic-focused or mental health-focused podcasts. Some of the social media folks that I like Father Mike Schmitz. I like Father David Michael Moses. He actually spoke at my grad school graduation, which I think is very cool for me. There are also, I have seen a couple of really excellent people around your age and like the Gen Z folks, a couple of TikTokers who are really funny and are still very respectful of the faith. I think sometimes when we see social media videos on faith, it really borders that line between hee and sacrilege, but there are a couple who do it really well. So I think if you find some people who can walk that line or stay just completely respectful. There's a young man who tells safe stories in this really enthusiastic way, almost like it's a comic book story. I can't remember his name, I wish I had written it down. But there are a couple who are really good, so if you're looking for them, you'll be able to find some. Just make sure that they're telling you the right stuff. Also, I think that's true of anything on social media, but if you have questions, Father Tucker is also an excellent Catholic influencer.
Okay, following that support back there, we wanted to open it to the floor now. If any of y'all have any specific questions that you would like to ask him, please just be aware, please ask questions that might interest the general population and aren't so specific for you. If you have specific questions that are more personal or just about you, I mean, I'm sure they'd be happy to have some one-on-one conversations later, but does anybody have any general questions that you'd like to ask them? And if you do, you can just stand up and ask.
Is there, do you offer addiction counseling?
So that's a great question. With the Rice Counseling Center, we do operate from a brief solution-focused model. So it really depends on ethically what's the most supported treatment for a student. So we do offer alcohol assessments, so a student can come in and have a conversation with a counselor to see where alcohol is in their life at the moment and whether or not that's just something that they are using to try to maybe integrate themselves into the culture or try to manage some of their social, interactions, or if there is a little bit more of a mental health need that's indicated in terms of like addiction or things like that. So oftentimes when we do that assessment, if maybe counseling is indicated, we can, if we're an appropriate fit for the student, we can have sessions with them. And this is something that I meant to mention a little bit earlier, but Rice Counseling is very unique in the sense of other counseling centers is that we have up to 20 clinicians on staff. We have walk-in availability throughout the day. We have no wait lists, and we see more students every semester, so we are very well utilized. So we also don't have any session limits. So someone can work with us. I've worked with people throughout their doctoral degree. I've worked with them through all the years at Rice. And it can just be maybe something that, maybe they decide to walk with someone while they're at Rice trying to understand how alcohol or other substances play a role in their life. If more of a higher level of care was indicated, we might help them get connected to services off campus. I also can let the well-being office hear a little bit more because they have somebody who works in their office that's more of a recovery ally as well.
Well, what I'm thinking of is not so much substance abuse. I've been a priest 54 years,
Right.
and do. So I'm trying to find resources that I can say, you need to get help with this so that you get better with God. If you have a broken leg, you go to the hospital, get it set. So go get this set.
No, I really appreciate that you brought that up. That is something that I think in the last 5 to 10 years working in the field is, I can almost anticipate when that question is coming from a client. And just like I did with you, I just say, we're talking about porn, and they're like, yes. And I'm just like, I'm ready to have those conversations if you would like to. And again, it's about just understanding where something is in someone's life. You know, if that's something that, you know, they say something that feels like coping skills, but it also creates a lot of turmoil within their faith, within their, you know, who they want to be. It's a place where we can have those conversations to say, what do you want your relationship to be? Oftentimes when I talk with people about like coping skills, you know, to me it's about where does that fit in with their other goals? Does that take away time and energy from the other goals that you have? Or does that leave you feeling like you're avoiding something rather than working into like something in your life, or being, you know, how do your values show up in terms of how you practice self-care? I kind of will tell students, it's like, you know, if you come into my office and say, I didn't go to class today because I just felt really overwhelmed. Okay, maybe that's what you could have done. If someone comes in and says, well, I didn't go to class for 2 months, I'm like, I was like, that may get in the way of other goals that you had, and now you might find that you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and so we kind of have to reevaluate what your goals are. But no, that is very much, I believe, something that's coming up more and more in conversations and how people are trying to understand that. And I think it's a much broader conversation about how the role of not just social media, but even just media in the last 20 years has depicted it and how it's viewed now. And I think there's still research that's coming out to show how it has harmed people in so many different ways and how people are trying to understand that. And I think also in terms of how that relates to our ability to have intimacy with ourselves and intimacy with people in our lives, like that also, there's a lot more that people are starting to come up a little bit more and talk about that. But people can always come in, do an assessment, they can talk with us. I know it's a hard conversation, it's a very difficult conversation, which I think, as we've talked about before, like, you know, just even having any of these conversations can be really uncomfortable. I used to talk with students about that all the time. I would say, you know, who would you feel most comfortable talking to? And then after a while, I kind of had to just tell them, I was like, these are uncomfortable conversations to begin with. So it's like, what would be helpful in terms of matching with somebody? But absolutely, people can come in and talk with us, as long as they're a right student, active right student, but there's also plenty of other resources we can help you out.
Yeah, and if we're not the right resource, I have several that I'm happy to send over, specifically about pornography addiction. Some of us in the offices do have experience helping people navigate that. I know I do. And we do have a weekly recovery group. It's supposed to be an open recovery, so from substance use, from pornography addiction, from eating recovery, we have an open recovery group that meets every Tuesday from 5 to 7 in the same office. So if you want to send anybody over there, there's always someone there from 5 to 7 p.m. And that is Erin, our recovery specialist. Her license is in chemical dependency counseling, but she can help with other forms of recovery. And I think especially for pornography addiction, as Catholics, sometimes we think that that's the worst one, but the mechanism is all the same. And I think that's the hardest for people to understand is addiction is not so much a choice as it is a circumstance. It's a dabbling that runs rampant. So there's a shame barrier that everyone who's battling that really has to get past. That's undeserved, right? Shame is silencing versus like the guilt, right? With guilt or with sin, we feel guilty, and that's sometimes appropriate. But especially with addiction from a Catholic perspective, it's that shame barrier that we have to push past, because we have to get over that shame, or we have to at least overcome that barrier if we're ever going to get right with ourselves after that. So we would love to see anybody who you have, even if it's just to talk about that shame piece. Because if we can get rid of that, a lot of times we can get rid of addictions too.
The only thing that I wanted to add on is like, you know, we also need to think about these developmental stages, right, of our student population, and also comparing with other campuses and other universities. Our recovery community, it's very tiny. Comparing it like other big state school, their students are very openly talk about their recovery, right, in many different recovery. So I think it's also about how to destigmatize, right, a lot of these like concern, and also get students to thinking about the stages of change, right, from like not even recognize it's a problem because I still function pretty well. I still can get all A's in my classes. I can still go to my classes and socialize. Why do I need to change? I don't really see it's a problem, right? To, well, why everyone like telling me about this? Maybe I need to start thinking about this, to like getting ready to change and take intervention. So I think like there's like, ways to go. And as a community, we can also like, supporting each other, be non-judgmental, and that's also one of the ways to destigmatize, these concerns.
We're working also with the factor of church teaching. Yeah, that's what brings them to me. And so you're working not only from your side, but church teaching contributes to the situation.
The fun thing about being a therapist, though, is I don't have to do the church teaching part. I do with therapists personally, especially if I don't know it well. I think it's really important that we separate some of that for ourselves too. Where if students bring it up, fine and dandy, but if I don't know it, I'm sure as heck not going to ask you to change anything based on that. But I will say, consult with your spiritual advisor.
Does anybody else have any other questions? So let's thank them all for coming and sharing their time with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for coming. So,
Thanks,
I'm from Louisiana, and there was a Cajun version of that story. It involved two rescue